Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a returning guest, a very special guest. His name is Austin Picard, and we've done a couple shows back in the past. One of the shows that people listen to very often was a show that we did on the Order of the Solar Temple. A lot of people hadn't heard of that, and were interested and listened to a lot of that. That was one of my most listened to episodes, covering the strange death of Grace Kelly as well. And I've been on his show. We've talked a couple things. I was just on with one of his co-hosts, Jose Gallison. I kind of did an overview of Aleister Crowley. So you can kind of see that. It's hard to believe, but I've been talking about Aleister Crowley for 15 years, which is really crazy. Right. Like way too long. But I'm happy to go over it. It's like so easy. It's like riding a bike at this point. I know all the dates and facts and all the stuff. Right. But we did Project Mockingbird. I was going to have him on to talk about Mockingbird once. This will be our third episode, but there's so much to talk about. We haven't even scratched the surface, and we're just like, we did 2.5 hours so far, and I probably could have him, but it depends how much interest he has in maintaining this. But there's so many characters we're talking the pre-show, and people I went over, and characters people may not know as well. We were going over the last show. We talked about the overthrow of Allende, some of the dissidents in the CIA, Agee and other people, right. And some that weren't really had to flee the country. One was John Stockwell, who was kind of like more of a conscientious objector type, but there's a lot of video about him, and he explains a lot of things they did. Like, I don't know why they didn't go after him, but they did. But there's other ones like him too. One is the Cult of Intelligence by Marchetti. He wrote a book, but he recently passed away. But it's a direct play on Dulis's book, The Craft of Intelligence, right? So it's a critique of what goes on in there. But this is part of it, this Mockingbird thing. It goes all the way to the present. It covers some of the stuff he's looked into, the Pilgrim Society, which is, some of these guys in the Pilgrim Society are in this kind of Voice of America or things like that, or other influence agents. I'm not going to name any names. Tucker Carlson, right? So it's like right. Some of these guys are still out there, like really good influence agents too. Like
absolutely,
I've keyed and started keying into Eric Weinsteins and Tucker Carlson's and how clever they are, and how clout chasing they are, and how really, I mean, it's like when you really put like a critical eye on these guys, or critical lens, very strange things come to the surface, which people need to know that this goes all the way back. And we're going to talk about some of these characters, and I have some slides. We're going to talk. Well, we were just talking about with Austin. We were about to get into a guy I find a very fascinating guy. Not a lot of people know about him. His name is Cord Meyer, and definitely just one of this Georgetown set, Eastern elite Brahmin, big family, and that's his wife, who was very popular. Her name was Mary Pinchot Meyer, and married and divorced, and she became a paramour of JFK, one of the many paramours. I don't know if they've been counted yet, but then she tragically ended up dead on the Georgetown locks and the canals of the old Georgetown, the oldest Georgetown, really, where George Washington's building these kind of canals that were important for trade back then. She was supposedly walking along, and they blamed it on the black guy, who I think eventually was acquitted. But she famously died, and I think somebody was at her house. I think it was James Jesus Angleton went after her diary, and they caught him grabbing his diary. Like, what the heck is that? So, but there's ties between her and Leary too, Timothy Leary. Yeah. Wow. So apparently, she was the go-between between JFK and Leary and acid, which really puts a different spin on the JFK administration and what the heck was going on. We know that JFK was, had a Dr. Feelgood, literally. And so, but it all ties into this whole kind of, Cord Meyer, in my understanding, and maybe Austin knows more about this, but Cord Meyer was the kind of head of Mockingbird at one point. He was tasked with these kind of influence operations. So we can talk more about that. So long intro. Absolutely. Austin, welcome back.
And thank you so much, William. I really have, I have to say that you have inspired a lot of my recent content right lately, because of just, unending threads that we can consistently just continue to unravel and discover more and more examples to reinforce, this alternative theory of, really, it's revisionist history, but that's where the truth lies, I think. And that's becoming more and more obvious and evident as you go tumble down these rabbit holes, right? And usually, I'm kind of dragging my feet in many ways, in more ways than one. And that is only, I think, mainly to do with the darkness and involved with some of the networks that you can cover and things of that nature. But in regard to Mockingbird, it's funny that you mention Marchetti, because I had actually, before I cover Cord Meyer for a moment, I had actually began my Jonestown episode with a quote from Marchetti's book, The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, because it just perfectly framed what I believe was clearly MK Ultra driven underground, utilizing many different techniques. And of course, I had mentioned before in one of our episodes how Jonestown was one of the cult groups and cult organizations utilized by operatives to truly, I think, effectively, run covert operations under this sort of false framework, right? And then it also really allowed for plausible deniability in many ways as well. And I think that's always sort of attempting to be achieved in the clandestine, circles of operations. So, but the CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, this resonated with me because Marchetti perfectly kind of illustrates this shadowy underworld that really does seem to, lay the foundation and the groundwork for full spectrum dominance in context of global society and the international framework of how really the globalist framework has been achieved in many, many different ways. And you can point to things like Confessions of an Economic Hitman to kind of make that case as well, right? Because it clearly does. It seems like covert operatives, they kind of exist in walking that fine line between public and private, right? The public-private partnerships, they seem to have been exploited for, since the foundation and right. And the, I would say, really the beginning of that framework in itself was almost a way to kind of, disguise the true machinations of this covert agenda. And so this book, The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, was the first book that the U.S. federal government ever went to court to censor before its publication. And so there we go again, right? Like, Mockingbird kind of props up cancel culture in its origin in many different ways, right? Because you can point to not just like assets within the media for the CIA, but actual CIA journalists who were legitimately staffed by the CIA and placed on, media publications, various different mainstream publications, and we have covered many of those different names. But the point being, right, is that they clearly were exploiting this hidden, framework to create this pretext to then censor individuals who were clearly sort of, dissidents within the establishment agenda, right? And I think that has constantly been, a facet of the exploitation of Mockingbird and how they've sort of disrupted and derailed, any actual journalism with integrity and honesty at its foundation. And so that is how the CIA demands that these authors delete 339 pages. But luckily, they resisted. And in the end, only 168 passages were deleted. And so this was written in 1974. So we're talking Operation Chaos, Operation Mockingbird, full swing, and this is right around the exact same time as right? The hearings that exposed it all to the public. And so that is not at all like a coincidence that Marchetti was writing this book at this time, right? And so this former special assistant to the deputy director of the CIA, also co-authored by John D. Marks, who was also a former officer of the U.S. State Department, Marchetti, he really framed it in the terms by using this expression, the cult of intelligence. And I loved that phrase because it just really does perfectly embody, this shadow government pulling the strings, manipulating public opinion in every single way you can imagine. And we'll get into how not only were they, compromising news publications and print newspapers and things of that nature. Well, they clearly were targeting Hollywood production companies as well. And I think that that's becomes very obvious. I mean, they even had agents themselves who were right on the set of many of these films, who not only were advisors to the film, but were legitimately involved with reframing the actual plot, right? And rewrites. And it's a fascinating thing. And so
just to interrupt, one of the things, John D. Marks is not a nobody. He was also the author of The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, right? So it's The Search for the CIA Mind Control. So maybe the CIA and the Cult of Intelligence may be a lesser known book of his, but a lot of his research is really important. Like I've come across some of his other work, but really an important figure, I would say.
Definitely, man. And so this expression, cult of intelligence, Marchetti essentially used it to denounce what he viewed as a counterproductive mindset in this culture of secrecy, elitism, amorality, and lawlessness within and surrounding the CIA in the service of American imperialism. And he says there exists in our nation today a powerful and dangerous secret cult, the cult of intelligence. Its holy men are the clandestine professionals of the Central Intelligence Agency. Its patrons and protectors are the highest officials of the federal government. Its membership, extending far beyond governmental circles, reaches into the power centers of industry, commerce, finance, and labor. Its friends are many in the areas of important public influence, the academic world, and the communications media. The cult of intelligence is a secret fraternity of the American political aristocracy. The purpose of the cult is to further the foreign policies of the U.S. government by covert and usually illegal means. And I think that they essentially use whatever clandestine methods are available to them. And I think that they've, very much over the course of time, advanced these sophisticated techniques to really, become almost all-encompassing, right? And I think that's where, like, you see modern examples like DARPA's LifeLog project mirroring Facebook, right?
I thought LifeLog ended when Facebook started to the day, right? Yeah, like infamously.
Yeah, it clearly seemed like they passed the keys to a private construct, right?
Yeah.
And I
Which
mean,
they do often, their fronts and stuff like that.
Often, yeah. And I think Operation Chaos is a perfect example of that, because it was by 1959 they were already, the CIA was effectively establishing proprietary companies and fronts and covers for its domestic operations. And so I think, the role of NGOs and even the United Nations as well, because I was researching recently how, Nelson Rockefeller, and there are just so many special interest groups involved in the origin of these international, really front organizations is what it seems to be, conducting, really undermining, civilian interests, domestic interests for the peasant class and the middle class that's very much being, just completely targeted and destroyed from within. But it very much seems like it's just another way to circumvent any sort of real accountability of any kind while still pursuing these agenda items with no real, dissent involved. And most people seem to be essentially and effectively they've been convinced that these are moral pursuits, right, within the moral framework of pursuing progress. And you see that with, I had mentioned to Jose recently with all of these drone sightings. And I always I'm always very skeptical of any sort of unidentified flying objects of any kind, UAPs, whatever you want to call them. I'm very skeptical of a lot of these narratives because to me it seems much more realistic and plausible that it falls within this new age esoteric ideological system of control, right, where they're effectively destroying Christian values, truly, right? And that is in essence what has happened to a large degree. Is like this, I look at and use kind of weaponized environmentalism as a great example of that, because it's allowed for like this new age philosophy of sort of, it's providing a theological doctrine, right, for individuals within this, let's say, this just complete and total oversaturation of propaganda, have been entirely subverted ideologically and convinced of that there is no God and the amorality of life. And I think that when you look at this new age esoteric dogma and how it's been kind of indoctrinated into the minds using through the subverted moral landscape, right, that's permeating through global society, you begin to realize why we're in basically in a moral crisis, right? And I think that Mockingbird is the best example of how they have subverted global society through ideological subversion. It's the Yuri Bezmenov 4 stages. And it's so very clear and obvious when you look at cultural Marxism and compromising, the public education board and all the different special interests that have gone into that as well. And that's where I find like Agenda 2030, Agenda 21, Operation Lockstep, you have the same exact special interests financing those agenda items as well. They seem to fit hand in hand with the Disclosure Project, and you can trace that back all the way to War of the Worlds, right? And Orson Welles, and that was a psychological study. It was essentially a psychological operation funded by the Princeton Project, which was, the Princeton Radio Project, which was a Rockefeller-funded pursuit. And so, to me, it's been really this sort of insidious tool, right, to subvert the moral landscape of modern society. And it's effectively, achieved many different, I think it has achieved that goal in many ways, right, and is slowly eroding and continuously targeting the moral framework of society, modern society. But anyway, I could talk about that all day. I just consistently see this as another tool of deception. And that is exactly what Mockingbird was the original construct of institutionalized deception that we could point to and actually have the receipts and the credible, tangible threads of evidence, right, that have largely been covered up. And that is why it's unfortunate where you have people kind of, knee-jerk reaction. They're sort of being imprisoned into this new age construct of information and how they, kind of how they, I would say, consume the media and news. Social media is clearly just another tool of deception, and we have now been conditioned to utilize it on a daily basis. And in many ways, it has conditioned us to behave very differently than we have in the past, and that is by design as well. It's just like pointing to conspiracy theorists being created as to be used as a pejorative by the CIA against the original dissidents who were skeptical of the Warren Commission report, and so what more can we do than realize this ultimate program, right, which was Mockingbird, with its intention being to control and influence the entirety of American media, really. But
shape it, right? Shape all of that. Like, that's it.
exactly.
I mean, even Marchetti says here how the CIA manufactures history. So they're manufacturing consent, manufacturing reality.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, incredible power, especially if you don't know. So the guys behind the scene know who their assets are, but we don't. We don't know who the FBI agent provocateurs are, unless it's an obvious one like Patriot Front or whatever that ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly.
The guys who walk around with it. I would just give advice to the next generation of FBI stooges. Don't start a phony far-right group walking around that everybody wears the same clothes and are all skinny and healthy, because that's not the average far-rightist. And the giveaway is the plastic shields with the things. Like, that's probably the last thing on some of these guys' minds. So they wouldn't spend money on that. So probably they need to get somebody a little bit smarter to run these ops. But yeah, no, I mean, it's like the fake reality, like all that stuff. Like, I mean,
it's the babies in incubators. It's like manufacturing consent, right? In every aspect.
It's still happening now. It's the babies in the ovens, right? The babies in the incubators, that was Kuwait. And then this 10/7 black op. This is a black op that took place a year ago. And the babies in the ovens is probably a preset phrase, because they know it'll drive all the Jewish people apoplectic, because it hits differently. Like, it brings in memories of World War II and the Holocaust, right? And it's starting to fall apart. The story of 10/7 is starting to fall apart in the Israeli press, not in the controlled U.S. press, but in the Israeli press.
It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, there are so many examples that we can point to. I mean, even the Ghost of Kiev, right? Yeah, I mean, it's just
all
like,
this stuff is fake. They're still lying. This guy Sullivan's on TV like, Ukraine is just about to win, guys. We're right there. Like, all I'm seeing online is the Russians dropping like massive bombs and Mach 10 stuff, and and they filled the graves very well. So we're still being just totally lied to. And a lot of people can't see through the fact that Zelensky's an actor. Like,
I know.
Ukraine would not, it's a pseudo proxy war. A lot of people can't get that, but it's not really a real independent state. It was taken over in 2014 by the American government. So you can't call it like democracy. It's just such a joke. It's literally as bad as V for Vendetta. The propaganda, Mockingbird type propaganda that we're getting today is as bad, if not worse, as V for Vendetta. Like, I don't know why anybody would turn their TV on and listen to it. It's that bad.
I know. It really is. The only reason that you would is to just get a sense of the propaganda itself. And that has to be your approach at this point, or you are running the risk of it makes absolutely no sense to me how, all trust hasn't been lost in the mainstream media. And it seems like, it has to a large degree, but again, it's like you have these, it's unfortunately the ignorance is what allows many people to kind of, run the risk of becoming vulnerable to this new wave of how you can consume information online. And it is a beautiful thing in many ways, because we, clearly we can have more of a voice, people like us and people who do truly approach these topics with honesty and attempt to, remain open-minded and not be, unwilling to reflect on your own ideas. And I think that's where most people have been kind of ideologically captured. And so they're almost unable to even question, right, their principles at any level. And I think that clearly you should have very, a very strong foundation of core principles that you've, I would say, outlined for yourself and deeply reflected on and understand as much as possible, and can attempt to, explain them, the best you can if that time ever did come. Because if you don't understand your core principles, right, then how can you even engage in reality itself without running this risk of becoming vulnerable to false information, misinformation? Um, you know, the level of deception is what I think is so difficult for most people to comprehend, because I see just so many people have lived their lives with this naive veil of misconception, and they can't quite understand the layers to the world we live in, and how unfortunately corrupt, right, many of these. I just view these systems of control, right, as clearly my enemy, right? And so anyone who's attempting to prop up these systems of control and institutionalized capture and things of that nature, well, they're clearly operating on special interests that isn't for the best of global society. And I am not in any way a collectivist, but I think that once you look into the erosion of the individual principles in modern society as a goal to again subvert the moral landscape, this inverted moral landscape that we exist in now, is a product of that agenda, which was to ultimately, right, subvert the ideology of modern society. And I think that in many ways they've achieved that very goal. And so luckily we have the ability, even though censorship is at an all-time high, I would think, right? Even if it is just, the algorithm and shadow banning, it's still censorship, right? And even when Elon hires that girl from the World Economic Forum and she says it's freedom of speech, not freedom of reach, and we're supposed to be excited, yeah, I mean, that's overt censorship. And it doesn't, to me, I attempt to kind of remain as objective as I possibly can, and it's a difficult task, and especially if you're attempting, to live your life in this moral framework and have ethical principles at your core. Like, it's a difficult thing because in many ways, and I kind of just covered this a little bit within the context of my most recent episode with Hosanna and the Delphi murders, because basically, if you haven't yet realized who your enemy is at this point, right, and that is clearly the perpetrators abusing the most vulnerable among us, right, then it's just, it is such a ridiculous idea and a ridiculous notion to consistently fall into this trap, right? And so I want to maintain my objectivity because I don't believe that individuals rise to prominence in this sort of constructed system without being compromised to a certain extent. And I think that has, been revealed more in, especially when you as far as you consider all the individuals who are part of administrations. It's the revolving door we were talking about privately, where it's clearly, if you're just an honest, tax-paying, sovereign citizen, and you run for office, you're not going to win office based on actual moral, objective, right? Like political, at least in my opinion, you have to be tapped into special interest groups, and you have to be compromised to a certain level, or you will never even see the door as far as entry into this political power elite. It's never going to happen. And so when you have individuals like Cord Meyer, who you were talking about earlier, and Alan Dulles is his buddy who persuaded him to join the CIA to begin with, right? Then it starts to make sense why, all this evidence exists that he was recruited years earlier and had already been spying on liberal organizations and had been a member at least since the late 1940s. And so he was described as a principal operative in Mockingbird as well. And I think that goes, kind of many people aren't aware of the level of involvement of Cord Meyer within the framework of Mockingbird, but also individuals like C.D. Jackson and the implication of their involvement, because it's kind of interesting the fact that C.D. Jackson is the individual who purchased the Zapruder film on behalf of Henry Luce, who was the key operative that really created Operation Mockingbird with Frank Wisner, right? And in many ways, like as far as Henry Luce was Frank Wisner's best friend, is what they claim, and Henry Luce was the individual who was running, right, the Washington Post. No, that was Philip
Times.
Graham. Yeah,
Times.
the Times. Yeah,
yeah. Which, I mean, back in the day, those magazines were it. Like that was it.
Oh, yeah.
Time Life. In the pre-internet. So those are also a Skull and Bonesman too, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So these guys are all connected. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it was, I believe, Deborah Davis. Yeah, she wrote a book, and she was the one who claimed that Meyer was Mockingbird's principal operative, and also that one of the most important journalists under the control of Mockingbird was Joseph Alsop, who's a prominent Pilgrims member, right? And we've talked about that in the past, because the Washington Post, despite not being located in New York City, is still as liberal of an establishment mouthpiece and close to the Pilgrim Society as any of those publications came at that point. And Pilgrim's vice president at the time, Henry Kissinger, he was one of the best friends of decades-long Post owner Katharine Graham.
Right,
and so longtime editor Ben Bradley was also close to CIA Director Richard Helms, and both coincidentally playing a key role in exposing Watergate, of course. And so it's just crazy, because Richard Helms, whose father and older brother were Pilgrims, as well as notorious CIA counterintelligence chief James Angleton, a future American Security Council co-chairman, and even before Watergate, Graham was using the newspaper to pressure Nixon into implementing different programs. And as Nixon, apparently, this even included the first experimental methadone programs, which were then abandoned subsequently under Reagan. But Newsweek, from like 1937 to 1961, Newsweek was dominated by Pilgrim Society members involved in Mockingbird. Besides, yeah. And
yeah,
so
it's all this incestuous thing. Never mentioned in the mass media. You could probably never find anything about the Pilgrim Society anywhere. Maybe it's very small things. I bet you could do a search on like newspapers.com. You probably wouldn't see much about it or not much in detail. So it's kept very hush-hush. This is an interesting pick because this is 1951. Cord Meyer, his wife Mary Pinchot Meyer, and Wisnar Janney, whose son would go on to write this book about this whole thing called Mary's Mosaic, the CIA conspiracy to murder JFK. Mary Pinchot Meyer and their vision for world peace. So it's like also this world peace that ties into Cord Meyer and all these other characters. All forged together. All these CIA guys are personalities forged together in World War II. All of them. Yeah. All of them.
Absolutely. And it was, the point of it was to kind of like absolve international borders and the mindset, the psychology of the peasant class, right? The underclass, I like to say, right? Which is effectively why I named my podcast that, because I've seen these new age globalist eugenicists who refer to us in that framework, in those terms, right? As the swath of underclass, right? And they truly do view us as vermin, and essentially as just cattle for them to herd through these various agenda items and into these prisons of control. And that is truly what seems to have happened, is we're in this kind of new age framework, this new age prison of psychological, ideological control. And so Newsweek, it's ridiculous because it was owned by the Astor Foundation, named after a family with whole generations of members in both the British and the American Pilgrim Society. Among the directors of the Astor Foundation was also Pilgrim Society member Gates Magara, whom Magara had been chairman of the Rockefeller's Chase National Bank, a U.S. member of the General Council of the German Reichsbank, chairman of the New York Federal Reserve, and the first president of the Bank for International Settlements. He also was a grandfather of CIA Director Richard Helms, whose older brother could also be found in the Pilgrims. So you just see at the principal leadership of Mockingbird were very well represented in this, clearly this secret society of right, this fraternal organization of powerful influence, and I just don't see it as being possible that it's a coincidence that they all are within these overlapping fraternal organizations and clearly pursuing similar agendas. Yeah, I saw it described as, it's kind of perfectly described in this way, as if you consider the left-wing Ramparts magazine, because they had kind of a pivotal role in the 1960s supporting anti-Vietnam War protesters, but took a skeptical stance on the JFK assassination and were attempting to expose the role of the CIA and the National Student Association, which was all happening during Operation Chaos. And so, of course, what does the CIA do? It runs a covert operation against the magazine that included blackmail, successfully undermining the publication itself. And then these details are basically this liberal CIA oversight, which also lists numerous modern New Left media outlets that are supported by, of course, Pilgrims ran foundations like Carnegie, Rockefeller, Ford, MacArthur, Soros. And then you have Harper's, The Nation, Mother Jones, NPR, PBS, and other outlets all belong to this elite-backed New Left network. And so these foundations have been coordinating their efforts and effectively act as a branch of the CIA, but only if this liberal establishment gets along with the CIA director and the White House. So essentially, these foundations and their private networks form this above government network, and have and so for the most part, it appears that the Eastern establishment and really the international liberal establishment is acting like one big family, right? Sometimes, right. And so
that should be the title of the book on like the Pilgrims, is One Big Family. That's all it is. It's all family perfect. Connections and friends hanging out. It's the time. It's like that thing about the Pilgrims. It's not public diplomacy. It's this private diplomacy that takes place at these clubs and schools and things like that. That's where it really plays out. And then it just, the public stuff is almost like stuff they've already agreed upon somewhere else. So it's almost like everything is just theater.
Yeah. I 100%. I believe that most of what is available to the public is political theater meant for largely for deceptive purposes. And I think that, especially going through the names, like we mentioned, C.D. Jackson, not only did he purchase the Zapruder film for Henry Luce, a key Mockingbird operative, C.D. Jackson himself was a key Mockingbird operative, but he's also tapped by the CIA to personally, become a part of the Eisenhower administration. And then his job was to write the speeches for Eisenhower. So then you wonder why Eisenhower's the one who warns us all of the military-industrial complex. Like, isn't that amazing? At the end of it all, he's just like, wow.
Just incredible stuff, man.
It truly
like these
is.
Guys, you just don't know what's going on. And just like we were talking, what's that, the Georgetown set and all these guys, they're all just one big family. And then like the JFK thing, they all started shooting each other. Mira Pinchot-Meyer. Yep. The cover of this book, by the way, is where they found, let me see if I can get back over here, where they found her body. This is her, like, dead. I mean, it's pretty rough.
Jeez.
But that's her, yeah.
My gosh, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
64. So it's like that whole post November 63 where people, mysteriously early, unalived. That's a way to put it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it seems like the agency was cleaning house, right? After the exposure and right of the clandestine operations. It does seem that way, and the way that I basically, it's been put in the terms of Helms instantly called for the destruction of files. So countless files, we're talking thousands and thousands of files, were effectively destroyed when this was, being exposed to the public. And so there's so much more that we have never actually even been exposed to, right? And once you realize how much of a heavy hand that they played within the kind of the construct of Hollywood as well, and the level of influence there, it has to be psychological engineering. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. So you had, we've mentioned Ben Bradley, Walter Pincus, right? Washington Post, Walter Winchell, New York Daily Mirror, Drew Pearson, Lippman, William Allen White. There's so many. Whitelaw Reid. Hal Hendricks is the one that I had mentioned last episode, who provided the original narrative of Oswald only hours after, right, the event occurred. And before the FBI even had any tip of who the alleged perpetrator was. It was an actual Mockingbird media CIA asset who provided that story to the press. And then, so, I mean, plus you have, after 1953, when Alan Dulles takes over, by this time, Operation Mockingbird had apparently major influence over at least 25 newspapers and wire agencies, because that's when, like William Paley, prominent Pilgrim, CBS, right? Henry Luce, Time Magazine, Life Magazine, Dorothy Schiff, Helen Rogers Reed, James Copley. And that's when really the OPC becomes, I believe the DPP is what it turns into at a certain point. But I know that when the Office of Policy Coordination was funded, it was funded by siphoning off funds intended for the Marshall Plan, which, it's kind of interesting. After, like, post Operation Paperclip is when the first what they called the flying disc craze of 1947, right? And yeah, it's very interesting to me because who was the Warner von Braun, who came over in Paperclip, and was it was proven that he was, on site at these concentration camps, ordering the death of right, and like the hanging.
He was a literal Nazi, I think, colonel or something. Like, he was a member of the Nazi party. Yeah. It was a place called Peenemünde. It's where they had the V2 rockets, and they had tons of dead bodies there of like slave labor and stuff. Like, he was in on it. They literally clipped him in a big bad way. So he was a Nazi.
Isn't it crazy that he's considered, he's obviously a Nazi scientist, but he's still considered the father of the American lunar program, and was advocating the human mission to Mars, right? And
he also kind of proved that the moon landing is fake, because he said at that time, he's like, we need to have 4 huge rockets with this much gas in just Earth orbit to get to the moon. Right. And it's like, all of a sudden, these tiny little ships get all the way there.
I think it's very telling what he had inscribed on his tombstone, right? Which was the Bible verse, Psalm 19:1, which was, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. That's inscribed on his tombstone. I found that very interesting. But yeah, and it's so insane that, I mean, it was Lookout Mountain Laboratory that I've heard named as the location of where they filmed the moon landing, and that that makes so much sense, considering that over the lifetime of that studio, it had produced over 19,000 classified motion pictures.
Right. So it makes perfect sense. So they had all the people in place. You could keep their mouth shut. They're right there in Hollywood, access to all the talent. It makes perfect sense, you know.
Oh yeah, Ronald Reagan, what's her name, Marilyn Monroe. They were all going to Lookout Mountain Laboratory, and just producing films there, acting in films at the covert facility. It's astonishing, really, because that's more than all the Hollywood studios combined, right, at that time. So
and I mean, it's just incredible, the overlaps with Kubrick. Clark was very much involved in the moon landing. A lot of people don't know, but he was like very much involved explaining everything, how it's going. So he had to have been part of the cover-up. And my favorite is when Nixon picks up the phone and starts talking to the guys on the phone.
That's for real.
Hey, he's got them on the phone. Hey guys, what's up? Like, where's that technology from? Like three technology.
Oh, they lost the technology, William.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I forgot.
Oh, it's the funniest
thing. I mean, it's really hard to believe too, though. I mean, just growing up, like I grew up with, like I had a toy of like the Apollo 11. Interesting number, probably intentional. But yeah, you know, and then it's just like growing up with just accepted as that. And those guys were made into heroes. You want to talk about Mockingbird reality? Like those Armstrong and all those people were turned into permanent heroes, you know, and it's been that way forever. They don't look like heroes when they returned, but they, I think, promoted them in the public mind, no question.
Oh yeah,
it shows the kind of ability to, you know, shape history, just like Marchetti said. You
know? No doubt. Yeah, and it was.
It's interesting that comes up because I just was watching Bart Sibrel, who's been on this show. He was on a much bigger. He's been on Rogan recently, and then was on with Candace last night. So
I didn't realize that. That's crazy.
Candace has gone noited, man. She's totally. She's like she left like the Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
What is it? She's gone rogue, man. She's like, she's asking the real questions now, which is good though.
Man, that's awesome.
She always promotes chaos. She always promotes that book.
Right. I mean, that's a pretty amazing thing, because chaos in itself can serve as a phenomenal introduction to, you know, the more normie crowd, I think, as well, right? Because at least I think that he comes from an approach that is a little bit more palatable to a wider audience, and I think that that's very important. You know, anytime you can kind of achieve that, I think it can be a lot more valuable over time, right? So I hope that more and more people will read through that, because I mean, I'll never forget that case, and I think it was in Chaos, where I believe it happened at one of Jolyon West's one of the Air Force bases he was working at, right? And basically, I forget the name of the military man, that he was just some low level, and he essentially was discovered outside of a bar out in the woods, like right off, like he had really committed a graphic, terrible sexual abuse on like a 3-year-old, and was in a psychological trance when he was discovered, and wasn't even aware of what he had done. And then whenever throughout the course of the trial, when his family went to visit him, he had a wife, he had a newborn child, I believe at least one newborn child, and had shown no signs of any sort of behavior like this. Had you know, an individual history that seemed like he was an ethical family man who was just all of a sudden lost all memory, and legitimately couldn't even remember he's looking at in the eyes of his wife, and he doesn't even recognize her when she goes to visit him. That's how much he had been psychologically compromised. And so I forget all the details within that case, but I do remember that was
vaguely that too. It was off of a base in Texas or Oklahoma or something in Charlotte, very early in his career that happened. And it was in the news. I have to go back and find that. But it's interesting now that you say it, kind of brings to mind, you see different pieces of things when people talk. But Sibro last night was talking about how he was drugged, and he doesn't remember anything. He's like, they might have these other drugs like that aren't disclosed. I mean, they may call them something else, but he seems to have lost memories of certain things.
Hey,
which I mean, I find him to be pretty reliable.
Oh yeah, and I found throughout studying MK Ultra, they had like basically what it is a sort of a nicotine patch, but it's almost a mind wipe, right? Where like effectively, what is that drug that is
scopolamine?
Yes, scopolamine. That was what essentially
devil's breath or whatever.
Yes, the devil's breath. You just become entirely invulnerable to any suggestion whatsoever, and are willing to give someone, your PIN number, your bank account, like in instant access. And I read something about scopolamine specifically being involved with like an extraordinary amount of crimes committed, where in third world countries as well, they'll just spike your drink with scopolamine and then steal all of your, whatever you have.
And you'll do it willingly and not remember. So that happens
insane.
in Colombia. Like they get these foreign tourists, they go see the local ladies of the evening, and then they wake up 2 days later and their bank account's empty and they don't know what happened. And they're actually very suggestible. So they're put into a suggestible state, which validates other kind of MK Ultra saying the applications of certain drugs can enhance hypnotic effects, which they've stated.
That's so insane.
Yeah, it's really crazy.
That reminds me of it's kind of ridiculous, but the goal of, you remember the columnist Jack Anderson, who was kind of making a lot of waves during the Nixon administration as well. He was exposing, I believe, the India-Pakistan policy or something that was happening at the time that was really upsetting the Nixon White House. And I remember that it was E. Howard Hunt had taken G. Gordon Liddy to talk to a CIA poisons expert. And the goal of this conversation was to consider the, how they could successfully execute the columnist and American journalist Jack Anderson for making waves as a dissident in the mainstream media. And one of the various methods, E. Howard Hunt even had G. Gordon Liddy give the poisons expert like some cash too, like so it was somewhat on the record, right, that this conversation had taken place, and that White House funds, executive funds, had financed this sit down. And so the ultimate goal of this conversation was to discuss the various ways that they could execute this American journalist. And one of those ways was aspirin roulette, which is what they said that they used as a technique to assassinate and execute any sort of, CIA target. And that would be just to place a poison pill in your aspirin bottle and wait for it to take effect. And another technique that they would utilize and that they considered using during this conversation was that they apparently they had this strategic way of basically creating a car accident where they would hit your car, an operative would hit your car at a specific angle that essentially 9 times out of 10 would lead in actual death of the individual in the car. Yeah. And so they had
he's really one of the original kind of muckraking journalists who got in trouble with the CIA. The other one that comes to mind is the guy who did an Opium Triangle. What was his name?
Right. Oh man. Yeah. He was exposing that what was happening in Vietnam there.
Yeah. He's still around. He actually wrote a book on mind control too. I tried to get him on my show. I just didn't close the deal.
Dang.
His name will
that would
come
be
to
awesome.
me.
But I mean, Constantine says that he says that in the 1950s there were over 3,000 salaried and contracted CIA employees who were eventually engaged in propaganda efforts, and that Wisner was also able to restrict newspapers from reporting about certain events, like, for example, the CIA plot to overthrow the governments of Iran and Guatemala. So They have, and I think it's even more important because it's kind of insane that they had utilized. Of course, they would, because we had mentioned full spectrum dominance, and why would they not attempt to infiltrate the churches to manipulate people? And right, I mean, it seems
we
like
already did that. I just did that show with Dennett where she wrote "Thy Will Be Done," which is like these guys are working hand in hand with like the old family type people, the Rockefeller family, and all these people to facilitate economic exploitation is one way to put it, I would say.
Exactly. Yeah, and Claire Booth Luce, Henry Luce's wife, she was very much involved with a lot of this as well, and this was written about in the Spiritual Industrial Complex, America's religious battle against communism in the early Cold War, because of course, just like with Gladio, the justification for these policies and these covert operations is the widespread Soviet communism threat. But in reality, you see the Fabian socialists perfectly involved with the Malthusian agenda. I see this overlapping, coexistence between large capital and big capitalism and socialist policies. They work hand in hand in more ways than one, especially considering the elite oligarchs and how they exploit industry and commerce. And I think that that's so obvious, especially considering the creature from Jekyll Island and knowing all the history of how they've laid the groundwork for this infrastructure that's been in place, right? That is really, again, providing plausible deniability just through kind of, I would say through just really distancing themselves from the theft, right? Because that's all it really is, right? Is like if you don't consider, um, you know, if you don't consider taxpayer dollars being exploited to fund, an international conflict that in no way you support, you're that's called theft, right? I mean, and it is very obvious at this point. I don't see how anyone could deny that as a reality. And so I've always just been of the mind that we should have some sort of system of voluntarism at the very least, just right. As far as like let's say you don't want to pay for certain infrastructure plans or whatever the case is, well, then maybe you won't have access to various infrastructure, right? That's being funded in that. I just think there's a better way of a voluntarist system that could exist. But of course, that's not at all, the goal of the ruling class is to insulate themselves from accountability, not to actually, right? And so
no question about it. Yeah.
Exactly. And so just like with in the vein of the spiritual deception, I see where Henry Luce and his wife Claire, they understood, and he says this specifically, this is said in The Spiritual Industrial Complex, the book written by Jonathan Herzog, but he says that Claire Booth Luce and Henry Luce, he understood faith as a psychological imperative sought by all people. If religious faith waned, other dogmas would take its place. The success of communism, then, was not attributable to its message, but rather to the fact that it offered people the spiritual certainty they no longer found in Western Christianity. All the shocking anti-communist propaganda and shop-worn tributes to democracy that America could muster would fail to arrest the Marxian surge. But if Americans filled the spiritual vacuum, if they made religious faith commensurate with military and economic power, then communism would dissipate. Now, I do think that there are certain individuals who might have truly believed, honestly, in this sort of old boys, what they convinced themselves was a patriotic duty, right, to fulfill, which is to oppose communism in every facet, whether that is to control and censor the free press, so be it. And it seems like that was the case in as far as many of the individuals truly believed that this was their patriotic duty. But then you have far more, I believe, that viewed this as just another tool within the construct of ultimate full spectrum dominance when it comes to how can we control the narrative in every facet of life. And so, yes, of course you would infiltrate and subvert Western Christianity as much as possible, because you could use it to your benefit, right? In many ways, if considering propaganda and using it as a tool, right? A spiritual tool to convince people of nationalist policies, like, of course that would function to their benefit in my mind. But anyway, J. Edgar Hoover very quickly became jealous of the CIA's growing power, and that raises its ugly head in the context of Watergate as well, and the Houston Plan, because there was a covert agenda, a clandestine agenda at play, where the CIA was attempting to gain more and more of a threshold domestically. They wanted to be able to violate their charter, which within their own charter, it says no domestic operations, right? It's just ridiculous.
And E. Howard Hunt is the head of domestic operations. In your face. And 100%. In your face, like, hey, we don't even care what's on the paper, guys.
Right. And how do people not realize, like, it took me long enough, but the Mission Impossible Tom Cruise character is based on E. Howard Hunt. His name is Ethan Hunt.
Wow.
And it just, of course, not only is Minority Report a perfect, example of essentially, the unfortunate dystopian future we're facing, right, with these pre-crime AI programs that they're attempting to act as if it's going to be some sort of a more reliable approach to right, limiting crime. And that is just like the most slippery slope you could ever imagine, is to authorize some pre-crime algorithmic, right, program, which it does seem like modern policing is very much, I would say, that is the path that they are following, is this Minority Report totalitarian technocratic state. And that in itself is terrifying, especially you consider like Starlink, right, and its implications and its role in providing advanced military applications in Ukraine, right? And you had even Peter Thiel's company involved with controlling the global supply chain, as well as OpenAI, right, and Carbine 911, which you look into that. That's an Israeli intelligence-linked company funded by Thiel, which, if you make a call to it, it can extract any and all data from a consumer smartphone. And this technology will be utilized in the rollout of the 15-minute cities as part of the smart infrastructure, such as light posts that will eventually be able to call the authorities instead of a person. And that's right. Great. And that's all in this sort of techno-fascism of total information awareness, which I think was very much at play leading up to the Oklahoma City bombing. And if you're considering the 1993 World Trade Center false flag attack, that all was generated by the CIA. And that was generated by this total information awareness, this sort of what it really was always intended to manufacture or gin up this war on domestic terrorism, which we can just, right, at least it seems like with all these different militia groups and various organizations that always tend to have a very heavy federal footprint, right, is a part of that very construct. And so
my favorite is the Patriot Front, which I mentioned earlier. Yeah. Like they wrapped up, I think they publicly wrapped up, and then like a couple days later, Ray quits. Like he's got to cover up the loose ends. Like, okay, let's get all the papers, let's shred those, let's wrap up all our dirty ops, and then I'm quitting and getting out of here. He's probably like down at the very tip of Argentina or something like that.
Oh yeah,
like who knows? A lot of these guys are in trouble, man. I don't know how they're gonna make. I don't think this is one of those administrations where they come in and pardon everybody and just let bygones be bygones. This will be something where it's like, no, we are going to investigate you too.
Man, I hope so, man.
Well, I hope so. I hope all this stuff comes out. You know, the church committee is like a pivotal event. Marchetti's book influences the church committee, but like that, and they got rid of church, right? So like he was a troublemaker. So then also he doesn't win his re-election. Smart guy, Stanford Law School. You don't kind of trip and walk into that. But they pretty much ruined his career. And then he was dead of like a fast-acting cancer. So his political career goes, and then he dies at 56 or something like that, you know, fairly young. And then, but it'll be interesting to see what happens when all these kind of people get into DC. I think people should probably strap themselves in literally, because there'll probably be revelations that will shock people once January 20th comes around. If these guys are honest and really want to set a new standard, I think the American people are ready for what's coming out. I think they've been primed by podcasts like yours and mine and other people kind of talking about all the stuff that's been suppressed. That's led to our oppression. Really, the suppression of information is a form of oppression. And but by not being informed. So a lot of the stuff, hopefully it'll come out. I don't know. We'll see what happens. We'll see what Trump, you know. I think he's still on board with the warp speed or whatever. So that's not a good sign. And Israel for sure. Like, he's
I was reading about, it's a very interesting viewpoint. It's called the Trump Rothschild Rockefeller connections. And I was very scared of it because it shocked me. And I was like, oh no, please.
Right. Like, was it the Wilbur Ross who bailed him out from one of his things? It was a Rothschild banker, right?
Absolutely. And they said that his name was more valuable to them, right? And so I forget the exact quote, but it was very revealing in itself. But I think just kind of like the whole, like, Trump had purchased his first casino interests when he acquired 93% of the shares in Resorts International. And Resorts International has a very sordid history, which began.
Always was. Always mob connected. Yeah.
And a Mossad CIA connection, very deep as well. And it all tends to go back to this organized crime layer too, which involved Meyer Lansky and as a principal investor. And so you have this, William Mellon Hitchcock, David Rockefeller, Baron Edmund Rothschild. They're all involved as principal investors of Resorts International. And so it starts to really worry me because, it does seem like Resorts evolved from a CIA front company to set up in the early 1950s by Alan Dulles and his close associate, three-time New York Governor Thomas Dewey, a political functionary in the so-called Rockefeller Republican wing of the GOP. And there's all these various front constructs that were created and all these murky organizations. And it gets a little bit interesting because it also starts to fall within this, the New Jerusalem and the construct of the Temple of Solomon and this sort of like, what seems like, this, lean into this. I feel like it's manufactured prophecy in order to seduce individuals who, it's very much in that vein of infiltrating and manipulating the spirituality of various belief systems. And I think that, we have to at the very least consider the fact that they would attempt to do such a thing. Right. And I think that there's more evidence than we'd like to actually, consider. And the more and more that I fall down these rabbit holes, the more I realize that there's legitimate, credible evidence there. And so I think that just the interesting connections to not only Rockefeller, Wilbur Ross, and the Rothschilds, but also to Epstein himself was a little bit questionable as well. You know what I mean? And so I'm just consistently very skeptical of anyone in power, and especially when it's, to me, I see this pendulum of one side gets what the other side can't quite accomplish done, and that right, and unfortunately, when the pendulum swings, it never swings far enough, and really, it's this constructed duality that we're intended to embrace. And I think that unfortunately, it's allowed for the further facilitation of this covert agenda in many ways, because it's led most people to just kind of compromise. Well, it's better than the alternative, right? And yet we inevitably wind up heading in the same ultimate direction with the same end game, I think, in consequence, unfortunately, at the end of the road and the path. And so, yeah, Blackstone, Black Group, or Blackstone Capital, and then BlackRock. I mean, and Ghislaine Maxwell with Steven Schwartzman initiated in Skull and Bones in 1969, and of course, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin became a bonesman as well in 1985. And these are all administration officials within Trump's first cabinet. So I'm just like, I have been very skeptical from day one, especially considering when he was first elected in 2016, he held an event and Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton were there, and he had them stand up, and it was a very strange moment, and it felt like it was, you were seeing behind the curtain, where they all tend to coexist for, right, what unfortunately becomes, this dystopian, totalitarian agenda that is really waiting in the wings, and so I'm holding out hope. But Kushner, him, Ryan Williams, that basically Blackstone, who became Cadre's CEO, founded this investment firm Cadre, and in 2015, Jared and his brother Josh Kushner, they of course were heavily involved in this company. And Kushner has also partnered with BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, but BlackRock was founded in 1988 and part of the Blackstone Group. But we're supposed to believe at this point that Blackstone has been independent from BlackRock since 1995. But it gets so much darker than that, because you have, George Soros connection to secret financier behind Kushner-backed startup, and it's just, how many times can we just continue to witness these these individuals within this clandestine network of power brokers that are never truly revealed.
They're never exposed. It's just the mass media is not it's a joke. It's a total joke. Now all those people are trying to come over to do the simpler podcast and all that stuff. And they're like, Tucker Carlson, you got to give him credit, because he jumped ship at the right time. Like, a lot of these guys were already discredited before he went. So he made his move. Oh yeah. And he's clever. Interesting thing. I was listening to him. He was talking to Jeffrey Sachs, but he made some statement at the intro to a show that I hadn't heard before. I don't listen to all his shows, but sometimes they come up. And this one was, we are the honest choice. We are the ones who are the honest brokers of information. That's why you come to listen to this show. Go listen to it. And the fact that he has to say that is interesting in and of itself. Like, why would you just have to prove that you're on it or trying to do it? Like, and the real thing is, what are they omitting? The omissions of this stuff is crazy. Right. Like, oh yeah, JFK was killed by a assassin, and then leave everything out. Don't name anybody's name. Right. Don't say CIA. My dad might have worked for the Voice of America, but I'll just admit it, and then we'll move on.
Exactly.
Right? Classic limited quarter hangout type stuff. Right.
And I largely view Jordan Peterson, and Russell Brand as a part of that new age, attempt at subverting Western Christianity. I truly do. And it makes me sad, because, it's something I don't want to believe, but it's just unfortunately seems to be true. And when I look at,
I agree with you. One of the interesting things John Brisson told me, along with Eric Weinstein, who wrote an article for the UN, is that Jordan Peterson worked for the UN. He doesn't talk about that. Yeah, there's he's on record, like, writing papers for the UN. God. Just that connection alone is like, you're against subverting national governments. Then, if you're working for the UN, that's really what it's about, isn't it? And there's all kinds of occultism, Lucis Trust, and the meditation room, and all this other creepy stuff. It's one big monolith, and the Rockefellers paid for the land. Like, what's going on? So why don't these guys divulge this? Why are these omissions?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about when, because I was reading about how Nelson Rockefeller was so deeply tied in with purchasing the land for the headquarters of the UN in New York there, and how basically the Rockefeller family interests have been for long-standing utilizing this NGO complex as well as the United Nations as tools in their effort to rebrand what essentially becomes this long-standing interest in eugenics, utilizing Agenda 2030, Operation Lockstep, sustainable development goals themselves, right, are really just continuity of government protocols, honestly. And now they're monetizing natural assets, right? So it's just like, how far are they willing to go in the globalist framework to usher in the technocratic totalitarian state? I mean, I believe that when you see within their own acknowledgement, they are exposing themselves with their own words accidentally half the time. And I think it's actually not even accidental. I think that mostly they're just very confident because of how few people are aware of the clandestine agenda. And when you hear them legitimately say that climate transcends all borders, and about limits to growth, right? And how these Frankfurt School social engineering techniques, from the Tavistock Institute, right, have all been factored into this what inevitably becomes the transnational dilemma, right? Because that is what they're trying to stage, that global health and nuclear threats and climate are all these inherent threats to humanity. But in reality, you go and read Limits to Growth and you hear what they say. They admit to their Malthusian bias, right? They admit that we need to convince human beings, the public, the general public, that humanity is the largest threat to modern civilization, right? Is humanity itself is the threat. And so now we are we are all embracing these eugenics policies, and we have no real, I would say, foundation to understand that they're based in eugenics, right? And I think that was by design within the subversion of the public schooling system, and understanding how we could really kind of introduce the Jaffe memo and what that essentially does is completely basically prop up, right, this sort of new age philosophy, which has really taken hold. And it's a sad thing, because once you get into what exactly the Jaffe memo was, you realize that Frederick Jaffe was in charge of Planned Parenthood, the population control division, though. And this Jaffe memo became an infamous document produced by Planned Parenthood in 1969. And it directly implicates the organization by exposing their true underlying intentions and conveying the lengths that elitists are willing to go to manage the U.S. population. And so we all know Planned Parenthood deceptively portrays itself as an advocate for women's rights, autonomy and sexual freedom. But the items listed in the document reveal what truly is at play here in the agenda, and that is how to reduce the population of the United States. 1, compulsory abortion of out-of-wedlock pregnancies. 2, compulsory sterilization of all who have 2 children, except for a few who would be allowed 3. 3, compulsory education of children. 4, encourage increased homosexuality. 5, fertility control agents in the water supply. 6, induce chronic depression. That's the process of demoralization. I mean, what else is that? 7.
Like we're in this this
Yeah.
world where these papers have been written and implemented, but they
Yeah.
don't show us the papers,
No.
So the
Yeah.
open borders and all this stuff, all this chaos and destabilization and demoralization, it's all planned. There's no question
True.
about it.
Yeah, and one of the last things was the discouragement of private home ownership.
There you go. And that comes from the top. You never hear any of these politicians say, it used to be the home ownership was the bedrock of our freedoms in a lot of ways, because it made people have an interest in maintaining the system. But if you have a bunch of renters, you're going to have a bunch of people who don't care, and they're just going to opt out, or they're going to support the system. Or it's incredible, like the stuff. And this is all the kind of sub rosa subtext of the Mockingbird agenda. So they don't state it outright. That's the whole thing that's crazy, It's just like that this ideology is just permeates everything. Disney and all that stuff. There's never a man in the home. The mother's dead or whatever.
Exactly.
It's like just this whole anti-human. And I think it comes from the elites, it's always been an elite doctrine. Like all these people, and it validates their own lifestyles, I think, is like, we're the special ones. They're not. Let's subvert them, keep our kids on top. And I think that's always been the goal. I think that's what George Bush Sr. meant in his infamous September 11th, 2000 speech, 11 years to the day before September 11th, where he says, for ourselves and our future generations. So it may sound like that to the public. He's really just talking to all the other bums and parasites that are in DC. And that's kind of the two-faced words these guys use all the time. But,
absolutely, man.
Yeah, I got to wrap it up. I mean, we'll probably do a part 4, but I mean, there's just so much more. So much more. Yeah. We haven't even gone Smith Munt, the
Modernization Act.
Just so much.
I know, right? That and more than one NDAA, right? Effectively legalized domestic propaganda. And I think that is. As well as the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which goes really underlooked and underreported in many ways because of how much that kind of created this modern media monopoly, right? And I think that clearly this new DoD directive, remember that Tripoli had mentioned on Rogan, that was right leading up to the election, right before, and it was a Pentagon military update, which clearly seemed to empower the Pentagon for the first time in history to allegedly to use lethal force to kill Americans, right? But in reality, if you look back at what was happening during Operation Chaos and what they were doing to those student protesters back then, I mean, it's fascinating. I read Carl Schaffler, the arresting officer at Watergate, who was a military intelligence asset and clearly was was tipped to be there as the arresting officer that night. Well, he had made his really kind of, made his way through pressing and the student protesters and they were poisoning them. I didn't even realize this, but there was an actual program of infiltrating the student protest groups who were protesting the Vietnam War. And they would legitimately try and hand out things for them to eat or something like that, where they would legitimately poison the activists who were there. And there was so much more than even that, what they were actually doing. And I think John Dean himself even got into the White House because of his reputation against the student protest movement. So, crazy. Man, it's
amazing the kind of stuff's there, but that isn't emphasized anymore. And it's kind of like blowing the dust off of history. It's like people don't talk about this. There's a few podcasters who do, but it's all such important history. The darker aspects too often are left out of these kind of like sanitized versions of our history. When there's so many poisonings and Operation Midnight Climax. I mean, you have no idea what they're doing to the American public. You're a lab rat. So you cannot trust these people in the government. Where can people find your stuff, Austin? Your podcast, the Underclass Podcast, right?
Yep, the Underclass Podcast. You can basically find it on all platforms. I'm definitely going to pivot away, I think, from any sort of child abuse as far as a subject for a while, I think, just for my own well-being, because that last episode that I did, and I encourage everyone to go listen, but I will warn you, there are unfortunately graphic descriptions of tragic and heinous child abuse. And yeah, it's very hard to take. So hopefully if you can make it through that first hour, which really covers Hosanna, then you can get to the point where I transition into the Delphi murders, and I'm very proud of the case that I made for Delphi. I kind of think that it's something that's very relevant and current at this very moment, and it's something that I haven't heard this legitimate alternative narrative, which seems far more plausible, introducing this Odinist theory and connecting to the crime scene as far as neo-paganism and truly what seems to have been a ritualistic sacrifice. But so check out my most recent episode, share it if you like it, and then best place to support me is Buzzsprout and Patreon. And William, thank you so much, man. I had far more to actually talk about, and I got a little, on a few different tangents that I didn't necessarily plan for, but
it's all good. There's a lot to talk about. We'll get to it. We'll get there. I mean, it kind of, the thing is that it ties in. This whole thing ties in with current events, so it's like
amazing.
It's just, it hasn't gone away, and people. They're not supposed to be like inoculated against what's going on. They're just kind of both like shaped. It goes into the darker kind of shaping of our consciousness, or that you don't even go, is this guy a paid government agent or an agent of influence? Is somebody supporting him and getting him in these places in the right thing and putting him in almost like an asset, like an intel asset? And the answer is, yeah, there's a lot of them out there for foreign interests and domestic interests, foreign and domestic. And lots of people look at these guys at face value, and they should just be like, I wouldn't listen to anything that comes out of these people's mouths without a massive grain of salt.
Absolutely.
And then also you do that show with Jose Gallison too, right?
Right. Yeah, we do Already Dead every Tuesday. Right. I need to get better at plugging my stuff, because I'm just such a prisoner of the moment half the time that I always forget to plug all the rest of my stuff. But yeah, go check out Already Dead. We do every Tuesday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. We do it as a live stream. It's also a call-in show at the last half of it. But and then go check out No Way Jose, and my buddy Gray Pill's the producer as well. His name's Jules. He's great. They're both very good people. Jose's he's the best, man. Like, he's been such a really positive influence for me since I got into all of this, and he gave me a great opportunity going on his show right after Sam had me on Tinfoil, and we just kind of hit it off, and luckily it evolved into a sort of, this friendship that we could create something like this and kind of have a little fun. It helps me decompress from the episodes that I cover, right? And I can kind of, answer any questions that anyone may have while also explaining myself a little bit more, which I'm always desperate for, because inevitably I leave so much on the table when I cover the solo episodes that I'm always frustrated at what I have to leave out to create this comprehensive flow to the story. But anyway, hopefully people find value to that, and go and check that out as well. And I'll leave you with this though, William, because this is how I started my episode on Operation Mockingbird. And it's I think is a great theme to kind of stage what this truly means philosophically for us as a society, and at an individual level, and how it impacts us. And that is the Noam Chomsky quote, right? Which I've learned a lot from Noam Chomsky over the years. As much as I have issues with Noam, it's still, I think he's provided value for sure. And this always resonated with me, which is the issue is whether we want to live in a free society or whether we want to live under what amounts to a form of self-imposed totalitarianism, with the bewildered herd marginalized, directed elsewhere, terrified, screaming patriotic slogans, fearing for their lives, and admiring with awe the leader who saved them from destruction, while the educated masses goose step on command and repeat the slogans they're supposed to repeat, and the society deteriorates at home. He who controls the media controls the minds of the public. I just think that's perfect for Operation Mockingbird.
Agreed. Again, Austin Picard of the Underclass Podcast. Thanks so much for your time. And that was Operation Mockingbird Part 3. I would expect more in the future. Thanks so much. And everybody have a great holiday season, as well as you, Austin. Have a great holiday season.
Merry Christmas, William.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you and Merry Christmas to everybody. Thanks so much. Stay there.